So welcome everyone to another Startup Centre Victoria Meetup. What is a meetup? It's where we invite someone who's in business to share their knowledge of their journey. It's practical, it's here in the region in Centre Victoria, and we just love meeting new businesses. And this month, our special guest is Peter Bottomley from Run Rabbit Run. You might have seen him and daughter Alice on My Kitchen Rules. They're famous. I'm sure a few questions about that will come up later. But before we get stuck into it, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Dja Dja Wurrung Tangerang and Yorta Yorta country. And I think a few of you may be even further afield. So certainly we're very fortunate to live where we live and on such beautiful country. And we acknowledge the Indigenous owners. So, as I said, this is very much a resource, particularly for startups. Now, Peter, you've been in business for how long?
We've had the cafe, must be coming up to 6 years.
6 years. Mm-hmm. So you can still remember what it was like 6 years ago. And this is about the journey and sharing those practical learnings along the way. So I guess you didn't start off in business. Just tell us a quick snapshot. What skills have you gathered in your career life prior to becoming a cafe owner?
Probably everything except running a small business were the skills that I'd gathered in my 35, it's now 40 years of working. I started with NAB, and I was with NAB for 28 years, I think, in various guises. The last 5 years were spent in the UK. I was running the payments platforms for Europe. And then the GFC hit and we came back to Australia, and I took over a role doing digital transformation for a superannuation company and look after all their marketing, communications, and their digital platforms. All right. So nothing to do with hospitality.
There's a burning question. Why a cafe? I've heard a story said that bank managers, when someone comes into their office saying, I need a loan to buy a cafe, that they go and lock themselves in the bathroom. So you, with all this finance knowledge, why did you buy?
It seemed like a good idea at the time. I guess it's something I've always been interested in and always thought about doing. And we had a fairly big restructure at work, and sort of shot myself in the foot is probably the right term to use. I put up my area as one that could be easily distributed into the rest of the business, which meant they had an executive manager spare. So the golden handshake came along, and at the same time, we'd recently moved back from Melbourne to Castlemaine. Alice had commuted back to her job in Melbourne as I had, and then she gave up and got a job up here, and the cafe she was working in was sort of teetering, not doing very well. And I thought, she's probably going to be out of a job soon. I'm going to be out of a job soon. Let's buy a cafe. So, she had more idea than I did, as far as certainly the cooking side of it.
So Alice's skill set was?
Alice has done cooking since she was 16.
That's a really good start, yes.
It is a really good start. She trained in, she did a cookery degree in Scotland, which sadly wasn't acknowledged here. So that sort of put her off cooking, and she went into administration for a few years. But then, she's quite passionate about it. So I think she was pleased to get back into it.
So what was the hardest thing about starting off in a business? Alice has got the cooking knowledge. You've got a bit of management, finance knowledge. But what really, really hit you hardest that you struggled the most with?
Probably, I guess staffing is the one thing, and of course 5 years ago getting staff wasn't the issue it is now. But just being able to know your customer flow and your foot traffic coming through the door, when your peak times are. The cafe we bought had been a cafe for 12 years, 7 years, but had actually gone into decline and had eventually closed. So we weren't buying a set customer base. There wasn't anybody who really was a regular here because it had faltered. So it was just that through that initial, I guess, building stage, knowing what staffing you needed and the times, because nothing is fickle as a customer. Like, they don't come in at 10 o'clock. Even though you're ready for them, they don't come in. So, and you're sort of thinking, okay, and banking, doing the click, 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 click of, staff tidying and tidying again and sanitizing tables again. And I'm just calculating the wages, clicking over as there aren't any customers. So that took a while, and that one really messed with my head, I think, as well, because I didn't want to be short-staffed and give poor service, but I also then had to balance that against the cost of having staff standing around waiting to give service.
Do you think, Peter, as a startup, you need to be prepared to lose money for a certain amount of time? You've said that you didn't get that goodwill with the sale, buying in a set customer base where it was a smooth transition. So you had to build up from scratch again. How long do you think you need to build that foot traffic up? What's your memory of that? How long did it take?
12 months.
Yeah.
Was about 12 months.
So that's 12 months of not necessarily making a profit. Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Okay.
So yes, and just pouring. So you've got your initial, obviously, outlay when you purchase the business, but then it's just the continual pouring money in it to keep it.
So what were the things, the outlays you talked about? What did you feel was absolutely necessary taking over that business and reinvigorating it? Did you rebrand? Did you refit? What are the things you spent money on?
We didn't. The brand was a great brand. So even though it's called Run Rabbit Run, it was known as the Rabbit. So that was a good brand to keep hold of. And I found when I was talking to people around the street, what we were doing and that sort of thing, and they go, "Oh, the Rabbit." So that was a very valuable brand to keep. The rest of it was pretty much cosmetic. It was a very dark. I don't know. Probably none of our attendees here are old enough to remember the old British police drama called Callan. And there was just a single light globe hanging from the ceiling in the opening scenes. And we had metal buckets over those single light globes. So they would cast this sort of almost sinister light. And I'd watch people with their newspapers, and they'd be doing this to actually read the paper under the light. So we thought, right, we've got to do something about that. So we got rid of all those. The ceiling was almost an aubergine colour. So we had that all painted white, lots of mirrors to try and reflect some light. Because ostensibly we're a terrace. So we have a front window. Our back windows are all blocked off because of the kitchen and everything else. And we've got two solid walls. And
for those that aren't familiar with Run Rabbit Run, it's in an old section, Hargrave Street of Castlemaine, we're talking about, and of course Goldfields heritage shops, beautiful heritage frontage. And so you have to work within those limitations. So there's nothing like a fresh eye to come in and change your business over. So that was good. In terms of Castlemaine, those that know it, we do have a bit of a cafe culture, and it ebbs and wanes over the years, but we have pretty good pickings when you think about it. I wouldn't quite call us a rural town anymore, but it is a thriving country town. But did you stick with the Rabbits place in that mix, or did you really look at what your offering should be? Was that something that you analysed?
We did. We looked at what they'd been offering previously, and it probably had a place in the market, but it wasn't general enough. It was the guy who had set it up originally was Canadian, so the menu was a very heavy, bacon, maple syrup, deep fried chicken, all that sort of stuff, and we were sort of moving into a place where that wasn't what Castlemaine was eating. We've always been ones to go out to cafes and what have you, and it needed to be a much fresher menu. So Alice set about designing a new menu, and I mean, she really did, and that's sort of where she came into her own, was her ability to create a menu at a minimum ingredients. So, she said the only way this is going to work is if what we buy in, we use in at least 3 or 4 dishes. So, and sort of then being able to add in that gluten-free option or a vegan option without really having to have a completely separate gluten-free menu and a completely separate vegan menu. So, and even today, a lot of our dishes, it's a case of removing one element and the dish becomes gluten-free, or removing another element and it's vegan. So that's really where her strengths or her skill has really shone through, is the ability to keep that ingredient list to a minimum, because we cook everything fresh. We don't have this ordering of pre-packaged, pre-cooked food. It's all cooked on the premises. So, and we just don't have the space to manage a dry larder the size of a big restaurant.
So you've spruced up the shop, the actual cafe. You've got a new fresh menu, new cook, new front of house staff. What did you do to attract people to start getting customers coming to you? What worked really well for you?
I think having had a family that's been in town for 160 years helped.
It helps. It does.
It helps. I'm the youngest of 23 grandchildren on my mother's side. So the other 22, if they all come in at once, fill the cafe, which is great. There's nothing more appealing from the street than a full cafe. So we were very lucky to have, once we'd actually got going, incredible support from Castlemaine people and family to actually help us initially build that business. And we have people now coming in 6 years later who say they love coming in here because it just feels like home. And to me, that's the greatest compliment you can have, that they come in, they feel comfortable, they get looked after. If anything goes wrong, they know we'll fix it. So we just tend to try and envelop that whole country family feeling.
Well, that's worked well for you. What would you say if you took out the equation of your incredible network of family and friends for someone that would be coming into a town and starting afresh with only a limited network? What marketing would have worked would work for them, do you think, that other techniques that you've tried that you've seen success with?
Look, I think in this day and age, social media is probably the most incredible marketing tool you can have. I don't put much whatever in things like TripAdvisor, because 9 times out of 10, unfortunately, the people who write those are having a particularly bad day.
Bad day, yes.
And I don't ever respond to them. I made it a golden rule when I first started that I wouldn't respond to social media and I wouldn't respond to TripAdvisor. But unfortunately, I've got a pretty good memory. So quite often I'll be reading something and think, yes, I remember you. And in fact, what you've just described in no way happened. But I thought, just don't want to get into that argy-bargy. Social media, the Visitor Information Centre is an amazing resource. So actually getting some information, little flyers, things like that, because that's, they still have an extraordinary place in managing visitor experiences. So, if you're not in there, you're not going to be part of that decision-making process. Our location is one, obviously, that you can't do anything about. But if you were looking to start a business, then the location is absolutely critical. Now, in your years in Castlemaine, Kerry, you will have seen the transition of, Barker Street was the retail precinct, then Hargrave Street, then Barker Street. Mostyn Street's always been, because it's the connecting corridor between those two streets, but it just changes, not quickly, but over time. One part of the town sort of goes into a bit of decline and the next one picks up. So I think where we are now is a key for that.
And these are things you need to take into account. Obviously, not everyone can choose prime real estate.
No.
So you either have to spend more in marketing to make yourself a destination and obviously develop those partnerships, networks, visitor information centres. That's a great tip. But once you're known, people will go
I'll find you.
Yeah. So, you've talked about family a lot. There's a couple of elements I want to ask you about family. Let's start with the partnership with your daughter. How has that worked out? Some family partnerships don't always go that well. She's not listening, is she?
No. Julie's in here.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And she can't hear what you're saying, but Kerry's just asked me about Alice and my partnership. I think she's just taken a Valium. Look.
How did you manage it? Let's look at the positives. How do you manage a family relationship, whether it's siblings or a husband and wife, or in your case, father and daughter in a business, actively working together? How do you manage it?
I guess, and perhaps being related, you get an understanding of the other person. So quite often, we are so alike. It's like two bulls butting heads. But we sort of both operate the same way a bit. So we'll express a new idea or whatever, and then there'll be a bit of argy-bargy. But then we'll actually go away and think about it and give it, overnight, and then come back and then there's actually quite a good conversation. Maybe that won't quite work, but if we tweak it, like this, or if we try that, or something, it will certainly have a better outcome.
So tip number one is leave overnight to think about.
Yep.
And mull on it. Tip number two, I'd suggest, is don't have the conversation in the kitchen close to knives, but that's my tip.
Yes. Although we've never actually come to that. So So that's a good thing.
That is good. Yeah.
We've got a lovely backyard out the back of it. Well, it's not lovely, but it's a big backyard. So we can actually remove ourselves and have
Yeah.
have a conversation. I guess, well, she calls me a control freak. So I like things done a certain way, and she tries to instill in me that there perhaps are more ways to do things than my way, while still getting the same outcome, and that you know, 3 people might do something a slightly different way, and that suits them, whereas the way I want it done doesn't suit them. So is it, as long as the outcome's getting delivered, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm slowly starting to
So
get
there
that.
is, you have changed from 7 years ago.
Oh yes. Oh
yeah,
God,
great.
yes.
We
oh,
all,
yeah,
if we're
yeah.
not learning and changing, well, there's something wrong.
Oh, you can't have got through COVID without changing.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about that in a moment. The other element about family I wanted to ask you about, because this is a common issue, particularly in country towns, is come public holidays, we have family-run businesses, we have staff that want to be with their families, and it has been a situation for many, many years that an expectation of visitors that our cafes and our retail stores will be open. And the reality is quite often they're not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some try. You talked about the Visitor Information Centre before. What do you think is the perfect solution to this, other than good communications and letting people know what's happening and why? Do you think that there is a solution to this issue in many towns?
Look, something that I tried to do a few years ago was actually get not a roster, but at least an understanding of who would be open at various times. I mean, the obvious time of the year that we're talking about is Christmas.
Mm-hmm. And Easter is also difficult.
Easter. And I think if there was maybe through the local business organisation or something where there was even maybe a roster system whereby different cafes open different years. Okay, so you were closed the last 2 years, so you open this year, which allows XYZ to have the year off.
A great suggestion. Let's put that into action. Perfect timing, Peter.
Yeah, it wasn't overly well received.
But it's always worth trying, and at the very least having a flyer in your window explaining, you know, our family needs downtime, and if you do know of other that they can go to it, it is really nice to be able to refer on and let them know when you are coming back. So
yeah, always do that.
Ongoing issue. It's so
always
important.
Post on socials. Yeah. Always post on the website. So communications is the key. All
right, let's move on. Let's backtrack a few years. Hospitality, and you are our first hospitality meetup interviewee. So we haven't really tackled this topic as yet, and we need to be prepared for disruption in going into the future, whatever the case may be. How did your business survive? What strategies did you put into place during the pandemic, and did it work? You're still here, so that's a good sign.
The first and primary strategy was opening the door every day. That was that from my own mental health perspective. I felt that if I didn't open the door, I wouldn't open the door again. So making sure, you know, rain, hail, shine, 1 customer, 200 customers, the door was open every day. We had to put off the majority of our staff. And so it was pretty much just Alice and I running it 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, 7 days a week.
Wow.
We had Julie helping, my wife and Alice's mother, helping us through that period. Even Charlotte, our other daughter, was in assisting when needed. But it was a hard slog. It was a very hard slog. What
did you do differently? Where did you actually get an income from what things. You couldn't have the sit-down meals for a good part of that.
No, it was, no, Ethan, no. We talk about different business models. Well, of course, I could only do takeaway. So we had all the chairs up on the tables and everything like that. So our customers would come in and they'd get their takeaway coffee. Then they'd take the chair down off the table and sit. So that was
a bit of communications had to go on.
It was interesting.
Yes.
It was interesting. So eventually we had to just remove every table and chair from the cafe, so that they got the gist that you could come in, buy a cafe and then coffee and then go. I guess again, it drew to a certain degree. It drew on our resources a bit more. We did, our turnover was such that we could keep paying Alice. And of course, this was well before JobKeeper came in. And for those watching that have a company structure set up or a family trust set up, as my accountant put it one day, the way everything's structured now is fantastic when everything's going well, but it wasn't designed for situations like this. So ultimately, because my wife had a small business at the same time, and she had closed, she was non-essential. So when JobKeeper did come in, we had one JobKeeper between the three of us. So it was challenging. And then we did some restructuring and stuff that allowed us to alter that slightly. But I mean, basically, it ended up me having to go and find another job. So, and it just happened that a position became available at the local Salvo's thrift shop as the store manager, 3 days a week. So that allowed me to work over there,
diversify your income, and keep the doors open. Well,
keep the doors open. And then we changed, as a result of that, we changed our delivery options. So we didn't do every night. We would do evening meals. So I'd finish up over there, come back over here. Alice will have been here all day. She'd have all the meals ready to go. And then weekends we would deliver. We started delivering breakfasts of the weekend. So there were lots of things that were happening. But you talk about the family dynamics of Alice and I. Well, the two of us sitting here looking at each other 8 hours a day and her as stressed as I was.
In stressful circumstances, yeah. That's where it gets hard.
So actually we did a damn good job to come out the other side.
You did. So now, and I'm trying to cast my mind back, you have diversified your business and you've retained a little bit of that since then. I know I can see a bit of giftware behind you.
Yes, yeah.
How have you diversified your cafe, and are they worthwhile income streams? Tell us what you've done.
Yeah, so effectively, as I said, Julie had a vintage and giftware shop, which being non-essential had to close, and we had removed all the tables and chairs out of the cafe, so it just looked like this cavernous hole. And Julie said, well, why don't we bring some of the product around? It'll at least brighten it up, if nothing else. And so we did that, and just by well, it was I guess a bit of a fluke in some ways. The way we'd actually put the shop together created a great flow. So we'd actually separated the main part of the shop into two, so you could have customers coming in, going around, ordering, picking up, leaving. So it just gave us that nice, clean customer flow. It did very well because you've got people waiting for their coffee. They're looking around at the giftware. Oh yes, I need a card, whatever. And so much so that when we were able to bring back the seating, we retained the giftware, and it really has just gone from strength to strength. We're pretty well stocked for Christmas now.
Excellent. And tell us about upstairs. You've got to tell us.
And then the other diversification, we had huge, well, not a huge, but a large, I guess, function space upstairs that had previously been used as a gallery. And Julie and I have collected vintage clothing for years and years and years. And while regional Victoria was able to roam around, we thought we'd put a bit of an exhibition on upstairs to try and be an extra, I guess, draw card. And then that skewed towards bridal. Then we managed to get hold of Gertrude, the dumpster dress, which the ABC did a wonderful story on. And from there, wardrobe doors all over the country have been flying open with much loved wedding gowns and what have you coming in, because people are afraid that their children will burn them, cut them up, or take them to the op shop. And it's now taken on a life of its own.
And you get their stories with the garments.
Yeah. Oh, so we get the full provenance. So the dresses being worn, you know, and quite often, you know, a horseshoe or a cake decoration or something that special from the day, which just creates that lovely little sort of social history.
So that's just creating you do have, I think it's gold coin donation to go up and view that, but it actually gives people more of a reason to come and have their coffee or lunch and whatnot. And I know it happens. You know, lots of our family members have done it. They'll have visitors. Oh yes, we'll go and look at the exhibitions. So another great. Any other diversifications that I have missed? Prompting you on? No, they're the two main things that I've noticed.
They're really the gallery and the giftware. So it's
sort of working well for you.
Yeah, something extra to look at. So a bit of a value add, and then that retail experience as well. Which, you know, and if you actually if I could show you the whole cafe, all the tables sort of look at the giftware. Yeah. So while you're sitting and eating, all of this lovely colour is catching your eye. So
So you just mentioned Gertrude and the media, but somehow you and Alice found yourself on My Kitchen Rules, or MKR, as I found there's a hashtag for it.
Yes.
I must admit I was not a follower, but when it's a local, you have to watch.
Oh yes.
So do you have regrets? Are you happy you did it, or do you have regrets, and why was it such a good idea? Tell us a little bit about what motivated you to go into this show.
Regrets are a waste of energy, and I certainly have no regrets about having done this show. Alice started the application process before Christmas, just, you know, filling things out online. She didn't actually realise that they were, as she saved it, she thought she was saving it locally, but it was actually uploaded to the ITV collection point. And a couple of weeks after Christmas, one of the producers rang her and said, hey Alice, we've got your application. You know, we're really interested in talking to you. Have you got a partner? And of course, at that point, she didn't. She hadn't really thought about it. So I got a phone call. Dad, what do you think? Do you want to do this with me? So I talked to Julie about it, and we thought, why not? Why not? Live dangerously. You don't put yourself out, you don't get anywhere, do you? And look, to be perfectly honest, apart from anything else, it was the most extraordinary experience to share with Alice that you could ever dream of. It was wonderful.
Yeah. So it took you away from the business for a long while, I'd imagine.
It did.
You had to do a bit of juggling.
Yes, and look, I mean, we've got a small but an incredible staff here. What we did have to do was, and of course, anything we did had to be done in a way that there was no knowledge of why we were doing it, if that makes sense. Yes. So at that stage, our involvement in the show was completely locked down. There was no.
So your staff didn't even know?
One of our staff did.
Okay.
and then she had to. There was no.
It would be very difficult without someone in the know.
Yeah.
Yes.
So ultimately, we decided that we would close 2 days a week because we probably had enough staff to stretch the 7 days thinly, but it would have only taken one person to be off sick or whatever for the rubber band to break.
Yeah.
So we bit the bullet, and they weren't Monday, Tuesday weren't the best days to close, but they were the most logical days to close, and that just gave us that little bit of fat in our roster, so that if somebody did get COVID, because COVID was still, of course, rife then.
Even now, yes.
Even now, we were able to backfill without absolutely destroying whoever was working. So, so that was a good.
Okay, very important to manage that, how you did that in the background. Now, if anyone else has a question that they'd like to ask, please put your hand up or type it in the chat box. But I want to know the gossip now. Let's just get into the really juicy part. What were you most surprised about with MKR?
Probably how much fun it was, because we, talk about horse bolting gate closed. After we had started this process, we looked in, just did some research on previous clients, previous contestants, things like that, and there were some absolute horror stories and very negative feedback on producers, on the crew, and all that sort of thing. And we thought, oh God, what have we done, sort of thing. And at that stage, we hadn't been selected for the show. But as we were going through the process, which is a 6-month process, a lot of interviews, most of them done via Skype or Zoom because of COVID. Some extraordinary cooking challenges at home. What else did we do? Oh, there was a lot of interaction over that period, site tests, all that sort of things. And we hadn't really had any bad experiences. Everybody had actually been really, really helpful, supportive.
So you didn't have to pull the pin. You were thinking we could pull the pin if we didn't like something.
That's exactly right. I mean, until you sign the contract, of course, you're able to walk away. And I have to say, for the whole journey, the crew, producers, other contestants were brilliant. There's always one or two, and anybody who watched the show would probably be able to pick out who those one or two were. But on the whole,
how much in the editing surprised you? I mean, was it a true reflection, do you think?
Nothing surprised me. What you saw was actually a really good summation, and you've got to remember, the dinner parties, for example, went for 12 hours. So you've got, not only have you got all the footage of the team cooking, but then you've got the guests arriving at whatever time they arrive, and then it's a 12-hour sit down. So that then has to be edited into an hour and 15, an hour and 20 minutes. And we were actually quite amazed at, when we sat down and watched ours, which was the first one, whoever did the editing paraphrased the episode beautifully. There was some horrible moments in it when nobody's ever going to forget the lemon horrendous. But that was part of it. But it was all, it was as it happened. So that was and I thought, well, that sets a pretty good tone, I think, for the series. There were no surprises.
Did you know you were going to have Nigella in your home?
Not until quite late in the piece. That was a UK. We did know that it would be a UK celebrity cook. So Alice was hoping for Gordon Ramsay.
Oh, Alice and Gordon Ramsay, that would be a...
That
Yes.
one would be hide the knives. She was bad enough with Manu.
Yeah.
No, it was certainly, it was a lovely surprise when it was announced that Nigella was coming to Tooten.
Well, congratulations. It was just wonderful watching it all up on coming out on the screen, and you were very brave. It's not everyone's cup of tea. What do you think you took out of that experience? Because we take these experiences back to what we might do differently in our businesses. Do you think, what changed you in your attitude or the way you run the business, do you think?
I
should have given you notice on this question.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to turn the probably, and we travelled pretty much in a bubble. So because of, as I say, because of COVID, had COVID got into the production crew or to the contestants, you're shutting down the whole thing for 7 days, which, money, that can't happen. So we tended to, we didn't do everything together, but we would quite often just, put out a text message to say, hey, we're going to somewhere for lunch. Anybody want to come? And it was just watching how people interacted with different venues, watching how other venues dealt with groups of people. Because we have, just over here, we have a table that seats 10 up to 12 people. A lot of places in Castlemaine, you can't get a table that big because they won't manage it. So just, I guess just little, and it wasn't necessarily learnings. It might have just been a little bit, actually, that's
market research.
That sort of thing. No, I don't think there was anything stand out that we brought back. If anything, a much better understanding of Alice.
Yes.
Which was and our relationship. One of the most beautiful things that came out of it was reading the social media comments. Because of course everybody said, don't read them, trolls and all this. Well, I mean, I think I would have been lucky, except the one who said something about my toupee, which it's not a toupee, thank you. There were really no horrible comments, but the far and above outstanding comment was people commenting on the lovely relationship that Alice and I have. Now, pre-MKR, I wouldn't have exactly put it that way.
You didn't recognise it, but maybe it was a new setting, gave you a chance to shine.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
And so, and I think that has actually, that's changed how I deal with Alice now. So, if for nothing else, having Nigella knock on the front door at Tooten was wonderful for Alice and my relationship.
And it was also good for our community. We're all there cheering on the sidelines. And I imagine that through all the wonderful social media I have seen, you're very big on Instagram and some beautiful photos of you dressing up.
Yes, that was fun.
A great resource to have. So well done. Look, it's been a lovely chat with you, Peter. I'm going to end the recording now, and I know there'll be a lot of people watching this with great interest, but if our guests want to stay on for a moment, they can ask their own intimate, see, they're in the room as opposed to those that want to watch in their own time. And they can ask their questions. So I will end now and on a wonderful thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
But stick around for a moment.